Hello, welcome to my February 2025 reading recap. Somehow, even with February being only 28 days, I managed to read 16 books. Here's some of my stats, my most read genre, and my nonfiction versus fiction percentage. Last month, I only read fiction, so this month I really tried to get in some nonfiction with some autobiographies and memoirs. The first book that I read in February 2025 was an e-arc, so thank you to NetGalley and the publisher for sending that to me. It is Flesh. I rated this a 2.5 out of 5. Flesh is about a man who is navigating life, relationships, aging, mortality. The premise of this book sounded really good to me when I saw the synopsis on NetGalley, but once I received the book, I was kind of startled by how it started. The writing is very straightforward, it's very blunt, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of regular life things. The main character is very dry, and the dialogue is just straight to the points, and that does work for some books and some people, and I think maybe this book just didn't work for me. The second book that I got to in February was Tender is the Flesh. Now this one is very popular right now because of the dystopian kind of vibe that this book has, and also the dystopian kind of vibe that the United States has right now. I don't want to hear anybody's shock that I rated it a 2 out of 5. I don't know if it's the hype, and that made me think I was going to read a more gory book, a more gruesome book, a more shocking book, but I picked it up, finally. It's been on my TBR forever. Tender is the Flesh is a dystopian future where humans are farmed for their meat, and one of the factory workers starts questioning, should we be eating humans? It's very interesting. I felt like the gore was very gimmicky, was like, here's the hook, super gory, and then no more gore throughout the rest of the book. And that disappointed me, considering people were saying, oh, this book made me sick to my stomach, I had to put the book down while I was reading it, and I thought it was gonna be like very gory. Like, I was nervous because I am easily queasy. I was worried to read this book, but I got into it and I was like, where is the gore that everybody told me was gonna make me have to throw up while reading the book? Where was that? In the first like 10 pages and then nowhere else throughout the book. The police are coming because I hated this book. Rated a 2 out of 5. Also, I predicted the plot twist, which sucked so much. The third book is also an e-arc. Thank you to NetGalley, thank you to the publishers for sending me this book. It was Oh Sinners. I was very, very excited to get this book. It is a literary thriller about a cult. It's told through multiple different perspectives, one being a journalist studying a cult, one being the cult leader before he became the cult leader. I really enjoyed the exploration of devotion, power, and manipulation in this book. But in the end, I still felt like something fell a little flat. And I was also a little bit bored in the middle. I honestly still really enjoyed this book. I rated it a 3 out of 5. I would potentially buy myself an actual copy of this book when it gets released. My fourth read of February was something I was so excited for, and that is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. I love cannibalism as a metaphor for love. I love the eat me all because you love me kind of metaphor. But man, I was disappointed with this book. The synopsis for this book is a woman's love for a man turns kind of gruesome, and her daughter lives with her. It's kind of a think piece on all the different kinds of love there is: woman and man, woman and woman, woman and child, child and friends. And I did like that part, but it got repetitive. The ending was just there, and then I was not satisfied with anything. I rated this a 3 out of 5. Then I got into some of my most exciting reads of February. I read the living autobiographies of Deborah. These are Things I Don't Want to Know, The Cost of Living, and then Real Estate. Now, I read these out of order. You don't have to read them in any specific order, but that is 1, 2, 3. I read two first, The Cost of Living. It's also the only one that I don't have in the like actual true covers. I like to have things uniform, but that's okay. The Cost of Living is a breakdown and a look into womanhood, independence, and the process of rebuilding a life after very devastating things happen. Death, divorce, children moving out, all sorts of things. I rated this a 4 out of 5. I just thought it was a beautiful meditation and like little essays almost on life itself. Then I read Things I Don't Want to Know. This is a response to George Orwell's writing called Why I Write, and it kind of blends Deborah's upbringing, feminism, and political reflections all into one book that's also kind of like short essays. I rated this a 3 out of 5. I still think that the writing is wonderful, that there is so much importance in this book. I just felt that it wasn't as vulnerable and powerful as The Cost of Living. And then lastly, I read Real Estate. This is so far the final book, and this really goes into the idea of home and longing and memories and self-identity. And I rated this a 4 out of 5. I thought the writing about homes and spaces that we call our own and creating a place that feels safe and comforting and welcome for you was really powerful and made me kind of rethink how I'm living my life. So once again, these were probably the highlight of my February reads, these 3 books. And if there's anything that I can recommend you pick up, it's gonna be this trilogy. This is very important, and then a book later on in this. Then I read Simple Passion, and I've been wanting to read this for a while and I've been putting it off. This kind of style of book where it's really just one thought process without specific chapters or breaks or plots. I don't typically love those kinds of books, so I have been wanting to read this book for a while, but I've also been putting it off because I wasn't sure if it was something I was genuinely going to like. And I didn't want to read the book and put myself into a slump or read the book knowing that I was not going to like the book. That being said, it's a short memoir by Annie, and it's about an all-consuming love affair and kind of the emotions that one goes through when they're in that affair. I rated this a 3.5 out of 5. The entire time I was reading this book, I was like, may this love never find me. And then as it kept going, I was like, okay, it's better to have love and loss than never loved at all. I definitely will be reading more of this author in the future. I actually did read another one of her books, which was my 9th book of February, The Possession. And this is a very short book about a woman spiraling into obsession about her ex's new lover. So I was like, okay, this is relatable. I get it. But also I was more bored in this one, which I thought I would relate to more because I've never had an affair, but I have obsessed about my ex's new lover. So I thought I would relate to this more, but I found myself understanding Simple Passion more than I understood the Possession. I think both of them have very similar writing, and it's obvious that this author, Annie, she's a very strong writer, especially with these very strong emotions. I rated it a 2 out of 5, very unhinged, but a little boring. My 10th book of February was The Doloriad, and I can tell you right now, I was not the target audience. That was not a book for me. Following a dystopian vibe, The Doloriad is a post-apocalyptic tale of a very dysfunctional family that is basically attempting to rebuild society. I will tell you that Missouri, this author, can write. The writing was gorgeous, very thick, dense, heavy writing. Besides that, besides me not being the target audience, besides how thick and dense the prose was of this book, I felt like there was no plot. I was lost within the book, and I kept having to like reread sentences, reread paragraphs to understand what was going on, who was thinking, like whose thoughts we were following. And maybe that's the point of the book because it's a family, and so, you know, all of their thoughts are kind of the same. They're all joined up in their minds. I didn't even understand the ending, to be honest. When I finished this book, I was like, I could have saved myself the 6 hours that I spent reading this book. I rated it a 2 out of 5. My 11th read of February was Two-Step Devil, and oh my god, I hope to get this book in physical copy. I rated it a 4 out of 5. It is a novel that blends religious devotion and destruction with commentary on society, desire, and a newcomer to faith all in one. I thought it was a perfect mix of everything all together, and I was very intrigued from start to finish. I love the main character. There were parts that I was like, okay, this feels a little unnecessary, or maybe that wasn't like coming off the way I received it, but I still very much loved this book, so 4 out of 5 for it. Then I read An Apprenticeship, or The Book of Pleasures. This is my first that I read by this author, Clarice, and it's potentially my last. I don't know if any of her other books are a little bit easier to understand, or if this is just the writing style of her, but I was kind of lost in the writing that was very one-toned thoughts, just non-stop thoughts almost. There's not necessarily sentences. Everything just kind of has a comma and runs on. Basically, it is a philosophical journey from one woman's point of view in a relationship. I didn't love it and I didn't hate it. I rated it a 3 out of 5. Next, my 12th read was Betty. This is a reread. I was itching for a kind of sad book. This is sort of an autobiography. It's about the author's mother, and then it's kind of fictionalized, but it's about a Native American, a Cherokee girl growing up, and she deals with all sorts of trauma like racism and bullying, sexual assault. There's a lot of trauma in this book. I thought it was beautifully written and so deeply emotional, but even in all of the chaos that is going on in this book, especially towards the end in the last 100 or so pages, I found myself bored and wanting it to be over, which is kind of a bummer because I remember the first time I read this, and I think I rated it a 5-star read the first time I read it. But this time I just rated it 4 stars because I honestly just was like, okay, when does this book end? How much longer do I have left? And I'm not one to DNF unless I can tell that forcing myself to read this book is going to put myself into a reading slump. My 14th read of February was Indelicacy. I've been seeing this gain some traction on social media, so I was super excited to find that at my library. The wait list for it was not very long. Put myself on the holds list and I got it. This is a very short book about a woman. She works at a museum as a cleaner, and then one day she gets married to a really rich man, and then she lives this life of wonder where she doesn't have to work and doesn't have to do anything, and she's unhappy. So she starts meeting up with some of her old friends from when she worked at the museum, and throughout this whole book there's a theme of wanting and longing for something that you can't really have. I think the writing was really good for this book. It was very short. The writing was very artistic, was very stylized to the book. I've seen some people say it reminds them of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and I can see that. I rated this a 3 out of 5 because I think it ended where it should have began. Like the last little bit of this book should have been the beginning, and we should have got the rest of it. My 15th read of February was Elseship. This is a experimentative memoir. It is gorgeous. It is a mixed media book, so it's kind of got every few pages are broken up with a kind of like diagram or a drawing, a picture, an image, something that gives you a little bit more depth to the information that you're reading. Rating on the writing, 5 stars. I loved this book. I can completely understand where the author is coming from and the other point of view that the author tries to voice the person that the author is in love with that does not love the author back. I think this is a good book for anybody who has been in a relationship where you felt like you loved someone more than they loved you, or you were in a friendship, you were friend zoned, and you kind of are upset about it or guilty, or you're grappling with those emotions that come with trying to keep the other person happy but making yourself smaller in the process. 5 out of 5 stars. This is my favorite book of February. Now, the last book I read of February is from my physical TBR shelf. I mean, y'all have seen it. It's a whole bookshelf, basically. I don't know how many books are on there, but it's a whole bookshelf. So I'm trying to go through my physical TBR. I love reading on my phone, on Libby or Cloud Library, and I feel like that has much more access to me than carrying around an actual book because, you know, on my lunch break, I have my phone with me. When I'm traveling, when I'm waiting somewhere, there's my phone and I can read a couple pages. That definitely helps me hit my reading goal every month or every year. I literally just was going alphabetically and searching up each book on Libby and Cloud Library, seeing which one was available now. And I put in some holds. I got on some wait lists for a couple of the books, especially ones that had really long wait lists. But I did manage to find one book, just stopped at the first book that was available now, and that was Nicked by M.T. Anderson. Now, I did not know that M.T. Anderson wrote one of my favorite chapter books that I read as a child, Octavian Nothing. I loved that book. So I don't know if any of y'all have read that, but if you read that and you liked it, try this. If you read that and you hated it, try this, because they are still different books. This is based on a true story. It is about a monk who gets visited in his dreams by a saint, and basically he tells somebody about this and they go on a treasure hunting quest to free this saint and bring him back to the hometown. It's adventurous, there's good dialogue, there's a little bit of queer stuff that happens. There is some like religious discussion and history in the book, but I think it was done decently. And there's some humor. I rated it 4 out of 5 because honestly, what more can I ask for? A queer treasure hunting historical fiction humor book? Like, that is quite literally the genre I dream of. This was a great book to end my February reads with. I saw I was at 15. I hate the number 15, so I was like, okay, I have to read one more book. And I was going to try to find a shorter book just because almost like 220 pages was a little bit much for me, thinking that I only had 2 days to finish this book. But I was hooked and I sat down and read this book. And that is everything that I read in February. A lot of misses, a couple of really, really good hits. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought about them, or what your best or worst read was in February. I really hope that y'all agree with me on some of these, especially the ones that are popular that I didn't like, because, well, I am a hater in my core. I am a hater. That is the 16 books that I read in February. Bye.